Hello and welcome to First Contact, the world's first podcast where we openly discuss all things relating to humanity's preparation for open contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. I'm your host, Eesha Patel. If you are loving this content, please be sure to join us in the First Contact Facebook community and let us know what you think. Let's dive into another exciting episode of First Contact. Hello and welcome everyone to First Contact. Today we have a very special guest, Eric Mintel. Eric is actually a professional jazz musician who's performed at the White House, the Kennedy Center, and for the United Nations. But why we have Eric here today is because he's actually been looking at UFOs and other paranormal phenomena since 2016. So we've got him here today just to share a little bit about what he knows about UFOs to help us keep moving this needle on this idea of the first contact and the disclosure that we as the people are doing for ourselves. So welcome, Eric, to our show. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. Thank you for having me.
Doctor, that's not one I get very often. I wish.
You worked hard for that, so you got to have that title.
Thank you. I will happily receive that. Okay, so we're really glad that you're here, and you have actually interviewed quite a lot of people on your own network. And so you've had a chance not only to, go through some of your own experiences and your own research, but also you've got quite a varied lens through some of other people's research as well. I'd like to start with, and I'd like to ask this to every guest who comes on our show, do you actually believe, and do you have enough evidence to suggest that there may be extraterrestrial life out there?
Oh, absolutely. Without question. I've always loved the paranormal, even since I was a little kid. Most people know me as a jazz musician, but thankfully my jazz audience over the last 30 years has followed me into the paranormal world. But I have had my own UFO experiences more than I have when we investigate ghosts or anything like that. I've got more experiences with UFOs and sightings. And right now, right as we speak, there is a huge UFO flap happening over the area that I'm in Pennsylvania, in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. So getting a lot of people sending me drawings of what they're seeing, a brightly lit object that's just hovering silently in the sky, low, and not making a sound, but people are seeing this, and so much so that it's moving them to draw, and then they're actually sending video as well. And it's always in 3 points of light. It's always in threes. So it's it's a fascinating time to be in right now.
That's incredible. So I would like to jump into some specific examples in a moment. I guess what I'd like to know is what got you into researching this, and have you had any of your own direct experiences as well?
Yeah, I mean, in the area that we live in here in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, we have a lot of history. There's a lot of that goes back to the Revolutionary War, and here in the United States, Washington and Lafayette. And then we have a lot of underground railroad tunnels in this area as well. But it's a very rich in history and a lot of paranormal history, a lot of ghost stories, a lot of old inns, bed and breakfasts, restaurants. So that right there, I've known and loved my whole life. And then the UFO phenomenon, I think it was in 2008. We had another flap here in Pennsylvania, and it was, and I actually think it started in January of 2008, and it lasted all the way to July of 2008. But thousands upon thousands of people are seeing the same object, which I think is still here. I don't think it ever left. And that's what people are actually seeing still. But, in 2016, you mentioned, that's when I started my paranormal TV show. And I just said, I love the paranormal. I've got so many great stories to tell. There's so much going on in our own backyard that people don't even know about. So I started telling stories of ghosts, UFOs. My own UFO experience happened in 2016, and classic, like what you would see out there. My girlfriend and I were going over this bridge in what's an area called New Hope. We're going over this New Hope. It's called Center Bridge, and it's a bridge that goes into Stockton, New Jersey. It goes into Jersey. And we're going over the Delaware River, we're Washington across the Delaware. So we're going over the river and on the bridge, and I just happened to look up and something caught my eye. And it was 5 orange orbs that just appeared out of nowhere. They were just orange and it looked like swirling lava. And in my rational brain, of course, there's a restaurant nearby. And I'm thinking, while I'm looking at this, I'm thinking to myself, well, could they be Chinese lanterns or something? Could there be a wedding going on or some kind of thing like that? And all of this is going through my brain in like the 3 seconds that it just appeared. And then I'm like, no, it's a Wednesday night. It's February. It's cold. And no, there's nothing going on there. So I'm fumbling to get my camera, my phone camera, and I was able to snap one picture. I'll have to send that to you. And it was amazing. They appeared and they were only a few hundred feet above the bridge. So it wasn't really high up. It wasn't as high as like a star would be. These are very low. And it looked like it did a search pattern over the river. And then one by one, they just disappeared. And I was able to get one shot. That was something that we're still wrapping our heads around. Like, what was that? And it wasn't any kind of like fear or anything like that, or any scared feeling. It was just like fascinating. Like, what was that? What did we just see? And then come to find out, other people are seeing these same objects. So it's something that's been going on for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
There's
a lot of questions in that. Like, for example, if so many people are witnessing it, is there some normal prosaic explanation for it? Or if it is something other than that, why the secrecy? And I guess that's a big part of the conversations that we've been having as well.
Yeah, I had an interview with somebody the other day, and it was actually Ralph Blumenthal from the New York Times. And he said it's a guy that he did some research on, Dr. John Mack, which I'm sure you're familiar with, who did really he delved into a lot of the UFO abduction phenomena. And he found that some people are picked to see these events, to see this phenomena. It's not everybody seeing it, but there's certain people that see it. And I think that we as human beings, we work on frequency. And I think there's probably, in my opinion anyway, I think that there are people's antenna are more attuned to that situation, to the UFO phenomena, where they're actually seeing these objects more than the average person would see. And so I think there's a certain element of, being in the right place at the right time, and also having your, just your awareness of the entire situation. And that's what I think there are certain people that are picked to see these and to even make contact, and
what do you think could be the deciding factor for somebody being chosen to be that person?
It could have like a family, like say someone in someone's family had contact years ago, and it stays within the family. Like that particular family member, it's kind of like a generational thing. We've seen that happen as well. And as far as the secrecy goes, here's my opinion, and probably people don't like to hear this, but I really don't think the government does know what they are or what it is. I think they're covering up what it could be, but I don't think they know what it is or what people are seeing. I mean, just because if they're doing a lousy job of covering it up, because people are seeing these things all over the place. And now that the government at least is starting that conversation of, look, they're saying that, hey, folks, the UFOs are real. We just don't know what they are. And I truly believe they don't know what it is. As far as, and as far as the cover up goes, I mean, you go all the way back to Roswell, to the Roswell crash in 1947. That was something so exotic. They didn't want to panic the public. So of course, back in that time frame, or that consciousness of our brain at that point, I think they had to say certain things to not have the public panic. But now I think it's like, I always say that, would we even be talking about this like 10 years ago? It's like, it's so commonplace anymore. People are talking about it freely. They're coming on camera talking about it. We're getting a lot of witnesses that are coming forward saying, this is what I saw. And they don't have any of that stigmata or ridicule factor, because, hey, our Navy pilots are seeing the same things.
Yeah, that's huge. And, I've spoken to a lot of different people in this series, and I ask a lot of them this similar question. And I do get so many mixed responses. Some people are absolutely convinced there's a massive cover up, and then it goes into the deep state, and it just gets really wild from there.
Yeah.
And then other people are more along, your perspective, in the sense that maybe they genuinely don't know, but they don't want to let on that they don't know, because they're supposed to be, the leaders of the country. And if they don't know, then everybody's kind of screwed, So, I think there is a truth in there somewhere. And that's what, I'm trying to get to the bottom of at the moment. I guess now, coming back to, the tangible, practical experiences that yourself and people have been sending you, let's get into a couple of specific examples. So what's a really prominent example that you can take us through that had multiple witnesses, where you've got photographic or video evidence? What have you got?
Well, just for instance, I had put on Facebook, I had put an announcement in the area that people are seeing this object. It's an area called Doylestown. It's an area outside, maybe about 5 miles from where I am. And I had put a Facebook post on that community page to say, hey, has anyone seen this object? And I had put the drawing that someone had sent me, and the thing blew up because people saw the same thing at the same time frame, at the same height. So it was one of those things that was an aha moment. It was like, wow, okay, so there are other people seeing this. Then I got a gentleman who lives maybe 10 minutes from me that's been getting the same object the last 3.5 years on video. That he thinks it's like a seasonal thing. And when I first looked at the video, I thought maybe it could have been a star. It could have been something that he's looking at that was pulsing. But then he showed me another video where this thing's actually moving, and it's pulsing light, and it's pointing, and there's lights coming to it and from it. And so what we're doing a video right now, it's a follow-up video to one we did last year, but we're almost done with it. We've got to do a night investigation where we're going to try to get this UFO on video, on really clear video, and try to see if we can. That's the thing, you can never get a clear video of these things. It's just because whatever technology they're using, it's preventing any kind of clear image. And there's so much fakery out there too. That's the other thing. There's so many, with CGI and stuff. And I mean, I'm sure it's frustrating to you too, because it's just, there's so much fake stuff out there that you could easily fake UFOs and that kind of thing. When I see a crystal clear UFO, I have to just say, it looks like CGI. But what some of the evidence that we're getting is like amazing.
Yeah, and I think this is where it comes back to what you touched upon before with the frequency element of things. It's quite funny, when I set out to do this particular series, I told myself I was going hardcore science, no woo-woo. I've been 8 years in woo-woo. I've been a spiritual mentor. I've done all that energy healing, manifestation, law of attraction, all over it. So for this particular series, I was like, right, I'm going to put my academic hat back on. I'm going scientific, and then every single interview, the woo-woo somehow manages to crawl its way back in. So there seems to be this inexplicable link between what it is that's, physically being seen, and then the frequency element of what it is. And I'm curious as to if you've done any research or had any personal experiences around these specific frequency cloaking technologies, because I know from other people that there's all sorts of fields and things that are going on that just, you can't perceive.
Oh, definitely. Oh, yeah. Well, in our investigations, say we're going in to do a ghost investigation, okay? So I go into these investigations more skeptically when it comes to the ghost situations, what people are seeing, because I want to look and say scientifically, like, okay, what really is going on here? Could it be pipes in the basement making noises? Could it be, an animal on the roof making footsteps or something like that? But having said that, and then having caught what we've caught on video, I'm really more of a believer that there is a really thin veil from here to there. And I say that, whereas that veil, could it be a portal? Could it be some kind of another reality? This is another idea. And it's in connection with the UFOs, but we did an investigation out in Elkhorn, Wisconsin. I'm sure you saw it. It's on the Beast of Bray Road, and it's an upright canine, werewolf, dogman-like creature. And this was in October of 2021. So we had an encounter with this thing, I went out there thinking that we would not see anything, but we actually had an encounter with this thing. But prior to having the encounter, we saw a UFO. a UFO went over the field. We were in this field. It was nighttime. It was about 8:30 at night, October 3rd, 2021. And our team member, Dominic, looks up and says, "What the hell is that?" And here, it was a solid orb of light going over the field. And you could see other planes around it. You could see that there were other airplanes there, jets and whatnot. This was just a solid orb, went over, and it didn't make a sound, nothing. And then it did a little 45-degree angle and disappeared. It just blinked out. And you could see it. We caught it all on video. It's on our video, the Beast of Bray Road, Alive and Well. Incredible. So that was the one thing. And then right after that, we heard this howl that was the most ungodly thing you want to hear. It was like a deep guttural scream, growl, yell combination that it sounded like a man screaming in this field that we were in. And then we looked over, we could see eye shine. We could see this thing darting in and out of the corn. It changed my whole perspective on what could be out there. But it had definitely had some kind of a UFO connection. We're also getting a lot of UFO connections with Bigfoot, the Bigfoot UFO connection. And this is something that we're still looking into. But there is a lot of correlations between, could these things be dropping these creatures off? Could it be, are they extraterrestrial? Are they coming into our reality from a portal? And when we're doing our investigations, we usually have like a magnetometer. And a lot of times we'll be in, like, if we're doing a ghost investigation, some of these areas that we're in have really high residual electromagnetic energy. Now, a lot of that too could also be wires. You could put it up to a light and you could get a lot of that'll read a high reading. But in a lot of the areas that we're in, there's no wiring. It's all like, we were in a 1759 farmhouse that had nothing, not even Wi-Fi. So there was nothing there, and we're still getting high readings. Same thing with the Beast of Bray Road. We were having these high readings in this field that we were in. And then right after we heard the howls, there was a weird mist that came up from the field. So I always say we had a trifecta of paranormal activity that night, which was, it was just something that this was something that changed my whole perspective on what was out there. Because I had heard about this creature and I kind of just didn't really put a lot into it. We went out there, one of our fans, pretty much paid for this video. And we did this video and it was a great documentary, but it changed my whole perspective on what's out there and what other things are part of it. You're talking about, a lot of times when people are getting those UFO photos, they're very blurry. There is something to that. There's some kind of energy there that's preventing someone from getting either a good video or, a clear shot. And the same thing with this creature. There's been reports of this thing, and Lee, the farmer we were on his property, he's got trail cams all over the property, but he can't get a decent picture of this thing because it's there. Here's an example. He has, like, in the area that we were in, it was called the bait area, and it would be an area where he would put roadkill deer. Like, he put deer in there to lure this creature in there. So he has a picture of this weird mist that comes up and it surrounds the deer. And then these pictures are 30 seconds timed. The next picture, the deer is gone and so is the mist. And this was within 30 seconds. And it's just a very, very strange phenomenon. So we look at that and I'm like, wow, there is something going on here. And then when we heard these howls, I immediately, we weren't, and here's the other thing too, we weren't really like scared, frightened per se. It was more like, what are we hearing? What is going on here? I wanted to know what it was like. And finally we did get out of there because we had no protection. We had like a flashlight and a radio. That wasn't going to do much. So, but the UFO, but it had that distinct UFO component to it, which was amazing. And we're hearing other stories similar to that, which also have the UFO component to it as well. So I didn't want to get off topic there, but it does have that UFO connection.
Right. Well, I mean, it would make sense from some perspectives because, from what I've heard from other interviews is that a lot of these beings are quite tall and some of them have different features. I've heard about cat-like beings and like all sorts of things. So I certainly wouldn't rule it out, as something extraterrestrial in the nature of these other paranormal things that you're investigating as well.
Right.
So I guess, you've spoken to a lot of people, right? And you've received a lot of different pieces of evidence and, lights and things like that. Have you ever spoken to someone who's maybe met one of these beings or had a really close encounter in that capacity?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've talked to Jim Peniston from the Rendlesham Forest, and I know you just had a great talk with him too.
Yeah.
I've talked to Charles Halt,
Mhm.
Colonel Halt, and these guys are the real deal. I mean, they really had an encounter with something extraordinary that night in 1980. And Jim, especially, who actually touched this vehicle, and then got all of these numbers and everything going through his mind. And so when you're in that kind of situation where it's completely out of your wheelhouse, like what is this thing? And it's just truly, it's unexplainable. But yeah, I've talked to those guys. I've talked to Calvin Parker. I've talked to Calvin Parker, Pascagoula UFO abduction, 1973. They were taken aboard a UFO. And the descriptions of that creature was more of a female-like reptilian.
Mhm.
And the beings that took him into the ship were like almost like robots. So they were very robotic looking. And he is one of the most down-to-earth guys and has never wavered from his story, and for years never told his story because it was just too upsetting to him. But finally, years later, he started telling a story, and I think he's been having some health problems now, but he wants to get it out there. And it's amazing. I mean, it's really amazing what he went through, and his buddy Charlie Hickson went through too. So yeah, so I've had the great opportunity to talk to these people who have had some extraordinary encounters that really it's part of UFO history.
Mm. Who do you think these beings are and where do they come from?
That's the $1 million question. If I mean, here's my opinion. I don't think they're coming from interstellar space. I think they've been here. I think they're coming from the ocean. They're either coming from the ocean or they're coming from the moon. And why are we going back to the moon? There's another thing to think about as well. We have not been back to the moon since 1974. So there's some planned missions now to go back to the moon. But I either think they're coming from the moon or they're coming from the oceans, because if you look at the beings, they kind of look aquatic, and a lot of times, the descriptions of them wearing a helmet, they're wearing a suit, a tight-fitting suit. So that's my opinion. But I mean, do we know where? That's what the research is all about. And that's the other thing too. When we do research into UFOs, ghosts, Dogman, Bigfoot, we always leave with more questions than we do answers. Always, because that is the thing. It's infinite possibilities as far as where these things could be coming from. And that's why we continue to do the research.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely agree with the more questions and answers. I've found that with all the interviews that I've done, I end up just having more and more questions, and it just opens up so many doorways. And I think it's so important to keep having this conversation, because at the end of the day, I think, the biggest conclusion that we can draw from just, experiencing and exploring these topics is that there is definitely something,
Yeah.
Is there an explanation for it? Maybe, and once we expand our capacity, our scientific technologies and our abilities, then things will start to make more sense. It's, I kind of explain it sometimes like gravity was a mystery before we knew what it was, So the things that are paranormal, I think, actually have very sensible experiences that are quite scientific when we understand the science. And I think that's where we're kind of on the edge of science, and where things cross over into spirituality or paranormal, or, like the woo-woo space a little bit, because we just don't know what it is. And so really what we're tapping into is the edge of the unknown. It's unknown. And so humanity's kind of lumped it in this bucket of, okay, well, we're not going to go there because we can't observe it. We don't have an explanation for it. So anyone who talks about it is a conspiracy theorist, and, you know, and let's just not go there. So I feel like there's been a lot of that kind of attitude towards it. Whereas now I think, you know, when you have these thousands and thousands of people that are having this shared experience, well, hang on, there is something to look at there. Was it a plane? Maybe not. Was it some sort of secret military thing that they don't want to disclose? I mean, that's a possibility. But then there are the very genuine experiences. Jim Peniston is one of them. And how do you explain a spacecraft in the middle of the woods and a massive download of binary code? I mean, you know, that's just wild. Like, the whole thing is just wild. And I mean, I've had enough of my own experiences, which is what got me into doing this research. I've literally seen the craft flashing lights in the sky. I've had multiple rounds of contact. I've had beams of light coming through the ceiling into the room, like completely unexplainable stuff, you know? And so yeah, like I this isn't about me, but I've had my own pile of experiences.
No, that's profound, and that's why you're doing what you're doing, which is phenomenal. You know, that's the other thing too. You know, we could go back to 1961 with Betty and Barney Hill. You know, they were the first ones that really, you know, and they were reluctant to come forward too. They didn't want to come forward with their story. But they were the ones that actually described those creatures that were actually, you know, they're all described now today, you know, with the large heads and the large eyes. And that's how they described it. And that was 1961. But you go look at the Bible. I mean, Ezekiel has his own UFO experience, you know, and everybody's read that story. And I mean, this goes back to before time, you know, it's like, they've been here. There's a case, which inspired Close Encounters, was the supposed landing of a UFO at Holloman Air Force Base. And that is a case that's always fascinated me, because the creatures that came out of that spaceship do not look like anything that has ever been described, which makes me think that this really could have been a true account of what happened. And so it's really something, and I think they're doing some I think they're probably going to be doing a documentary or something. Someone's doing something on it, but it's fascinating. I mean, you could talk about this all day long and just like never have any kind of like concrete answer as to what it could be, where these are, and these lights, how they just appear and then just disappear and they fade away. It's very odd, very strange.
I think that's definitely a big point to touch on. I mean, the technology itself is something that we don't have. And I think that's something that, you know, it really should create some sort of light bulb moment for people when they realize that some of these technologies that are being described, for example, like transmedium ships, you know, they're going from air to water back to air. Well, we don't have something that does it. In fact, China only recently has been playing around with that sort of technology, and I think they've managed to create something. And then, you know, some people are saying, well, maybe it's reverse engineered from what they already found because we didn't have that, you know. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
You've spoken to some of the people relating to Roswell, and I'm really curious as to what you've discovered in your investigation, because Roswell is, again, one of the biggest cases, along with the Rendlesham, you know, case. I'd say Roswell and Rendlesham are probably the two biggest sort of cases in UFO history. So what have you learned about the Roswell situation? And do you believe that there are actually craft and or ETs somewhere in the United States?
I would, you know, I'm not going to discount anything, you know. I mean, there's probably stuff there that we may not ever see, you know, but it could be there. But with Roswell, good friend of mine, Tom Carey, who is actually I would say he's the foremost authority on Roswell. He's written 7 books along with his writing partner, Don Schmidt. He's interviewed the original witnesses who handled the wreckage. That all said that there were bodies there. There were bodies there. There were recovered bodies. This very strange metal that they, you know, you could crumple it up in your hand. It would just like fold out again, and it was light as a feather. But you couldn't burn it. You couldn't bend it. You couldn't. I mean, you could crumple it up, but you couldn't burn it. You couldn't tear it. So with that, you know, with Tom's research and, you know, things that I've learned from him and from the case. The theory is now that they weren't extraterrestrials. They were the whole event was extra-temporal, meaning that they were us from the future. So there's this whole theory now that that was not an extraterrestrial craft. It was us from the future. And I'm not sure how that all plays into the whole dynamic of the story, but that's one of the conjectures. And then, do they have recovered vehicles? I'm sure they do somewhere. Are we reverse engineering them? Probably. Are we getting close to, finding how they work? Maybe. These are all the questions, but what the Navy pilots are seeing and encountering that are traveling 13,000 miles an hour, turning on a dime. And I mean, it's just like, there's no way no human could withstand that kind of G-force. So are they probes? Are they actually, a craft? So that's the other thing. And then we see all those UFOs that were just shot down recently, the balloons, I think a lot of that, they were balloons. I don't think they were UFOs because, they were moving way too slow. And for what the Navy pilots are seeing, they're moving way too fast. So I think I think what the people were seeing were balloons recently. But again, stuff that's not really being told in the news, that's part of it as well, not getting the entire story, some of it, but not the entire story. And that's where we come in. That's why we're doing the research. We go behind the scenes, talk to some of those people that, that do have that information, and just have a discussion. That's why I'm so glad that the government is actually starting the discussion, and actually just saying, look, yes, we have this program that we're studying UFOs. We don't know what they are, but we're studying the phenomena. We just don't have any answers. So it's at least they're starting the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an important part of it. I guess, there's been mixed responses to that as well, because some people are saying it's going to be Roswell all over again, where they'll start something and then cover it all up. Oh, nothing to see here, move along,
Yeah,
We have
exactly.
seen that happen before in our history. And so some people are suspecting that might be another one of those scenarios. With the Montana balloons, I did actually speak to someone who lives in the area, and she told me some things that didn't really add up to what the media was saying. So I'm still investigating that one myself. I've got some contacts of some photographers and media journalists in the area who actually covered the event, just to get a little bit more insight into what actually wasn't put out to the public, because there is more to that story that I feel like we don't know yet. It's still something looking into as well, but apparently the EMF was very high. There were other sort of things in that particular one that kind of raise a few flags in my mind to go, okay, there might be something there. And it could potentially be as well one of those situations where, there was something, and then there were balloons as well to cover up the fact that there was something. Yeah. So you just never know. I mean, this is all theory.
Yeah, sure.
Still definitely in progress, that research. So let's see where we end up on that one. With the Roswell side of things, it was very interesting that you mentioned the extra-temporal component of that. Now, when I set out to research UFOs, time travel was not even on the agenda. But 6 or 7 different people now, from the interviews that I've done, all keep mentioning the same thing. Now, Jim Penniston actually says something very similar, and I'm about to do a follow-up interview with him and Gary Osborne about the binary code and also the time travel component of all of this. They seem to have, from the very brief conversation we had in our interview about it, landed on a very similar conclusion, that the craft that he saw in the 80s was potentially an artificial intelligence from the future that had somehow managed to bend time and come back. Now, that again opens more questions than answers, because, well, that's suggesting that time travel is possible, which, I mean, that's a whole other ballgame, So
that's a whole nother show.
Yeah, that's something else completely.
Well, I did actually interview Gary as well, and I got to be honest with you, he's a great guy, but his interview, it was just so over my head as far as like just the intellect. He's a very intellectual guy, and it's very, very smart, and it just was over my head, and I was like, how is anybody going to ever even understand this, but Jim's great to talk to, because he was there, he was on site, and just to have that, to have that happen. But yeah, so good luck with that. Good luck with that interview, with that follow. It's like, and I mean, the theories are incredible. I mean, that's the whole thing too. Uh, and it could be, but how? But that's the other question. How does this all work? How does it all work? And but yeah, time. And the other one with time travel too was the 1965 Kecksburg UFO crash in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, which is probably about 4 hours from where I am here, going west. But that was, they also said there was a story that was the German Bell that was lost in the 40s. And it was, and the Germans were doing some kind of time travel experiments, and they're thinking that this was part of that, and it just happened to come into our atmosphere. But again, it's just like, so many theories you can go down, so many rabbit holes.
I think one of the things to consider is also, how we define UFOs. And this is where things get very interesting in the research I've done so far, because I mean, for example, I've spoken to R.V. Loeb. Now, he's hardcore scientist, Harvard professor. He's building a giant telescope. He's got the whole Galileo project happening. And so I asked him about the same thing. I said, do you believe that there's extraterrestrial life? And he said, oh, absolutely. But he's trying to find it from a very 3D perspective. And so, understanding the nature of the universe in the 3D, okay, well, if there's something out there, we should be able to measure it, see it, feel it, touch it, taste it, use our 5 senses and our scientific instruments to measure this particular thing that exists. And so then we have, people like Peniston who are saying, well, actually, yes, I did touch it. I did see it. I did experience it. And it wasn't necessarily something that is in this dimension. Now, Jim turned around and said, I think this thing is interdimensional and also from another time period. And so then we asked the question, well, okay, what is the nature of our reality in relation to time? Now, on the spiritual side of things, I've come through 8 years teaching people multidimensionality. That's been my jam for a while. And so I'm trying to piece together all of these sort of theories. Now, UFOs in the 3D don't necessarily make sense on its own, right? And this is just a conclusion I've sort of come to. It's still very much a work in progress. UFOs in the 3D, like if we were to point the biggest of the biggest telescopes over to any planet in our solar system, I don't think that we would find life on any of them. So if we're expecting life on one of these planets in our galaxy in the 3rd dimension, that's going to somehow have the technology to physically fly over to Earth, I think that doesn't exist. And this is where things get a little more multidimensional, because the craft that I've had contact with haven't actually been in the 3rd dimension at all. They're able to cross into the 3rd dimension and make themselves visible for very temporary periods of time, but their actual nature is in a multidimensional capacity. And this is where we do cross into the spirituality and the woo-woo and the completely non-scientific end of the spectrum, because it's not measurable in the same way that you can measure something that you can touch and see. So for example, I had an experience quite a number of years ago where I was in my 3rd eye or mind's eye, was seeing this particular spaceship. I could see its exact shape, and I actually drew it down for my friend. I said, this is what I'm seeing. And I drew a picture. It was very specific. It had this little tail on the bottom, very distinct shape, nothing like your standard UFOs that you would see. And this is what really, blew me away, and where I think the multidimensional theory really does have to start coming into this discussion, is that she said, well, you'll never believe this. Our friends who live in the same area, these guys, they take photographs of UFOs all the time. They've got a website. They really have been researching this for quite a number of years. They had sent my friend a photograph of that exact thing that I was describing.
Wow.
Right there on paper, like there it was, and so I'm seeing it through my, telepathic or energetic vision, whatever you want to call it, 3rd eye. So I'm perceiving it. I'm not seeing it. I'm perceiving it. But I'm able to get enough of a read on it that I can draw it. And then next thing, she opens up her laptop, and that is the exact shape with the little tail, everything. It's a non-standard shape. It's not something that I could have just made up. And as I was looking at it, I saw it go through a dimensional portal and disappear. And I saw this plane of light. When I say see, I don't mean physically see. I mean, in my mind's eye see, because I'm tapped into those frequencies. And so I see this thing disappear off into the distance. Next thing, we go inside a house and I see it on an actual photograph. And I was like, how does that work? You know,
So you manifested it. You manifested that.
Well, I mean, it's the chicken or the egg. Was the ship already there and I was just seeing, or did I see it and then it came up? And again, was it cause and effect, or which order did time happen in? You know, I mean, it's just hard to say sometimes.
You know, and I've had people too, same situation where they'll be like, you know, they say in their mind's eye, or they're saying it to themselves, you know, I want to see, you know, present yourself. I want to see a UFO, and it will present itself.
Yeah.
So there, you're right. You could be on that, like that cusp of consciousness, subconsciousness. That's the whole, in the spirituality part of it too. I think that's a huge component. I would not discount that one little bit. I really think that's a huge component to this too, because of what I had just said before. I think people are picked to see these things, you know, and like I work with a spirit medium when we go in to do our ghost investigations. When we were out in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, investigating the Beast of Bray Road, of course, that was way out of his wheelhouse. So, but when we go into a ghost situation, like I'll go in and I'll get all the history and any kind of paranormal history that's happened from the owner or from the restaurant, wherever we're going. And I won't tell him anything about what I know. Then when we get into that place, he goes right to the hot spots and he's just sensing all of that. So he's tuning into that. So he's, in his mind's eye, he's trying to tune in with that energy that's in that particular environment. Does that make sense? So it's like, it's that kind of situation. And it blows me away every time, because 99% of the time he's right in those areas that has had all that activity.
And I think there is something to be said for that perception of frequency, or that unseen kind of force. You know, I mean, I've come through a background of energy healing, so I understand energy quite well. You know, the ability to look into a person's energy field and be able to see, okay, they've got so-and-so illness happening, or energetic blockages, emotional blockages, etc. And I've done that for years. And now translating that skill into, well, can we do the same with UFOs? And what I found really interesting is applying that to discerning whether certain photographs are true or fake, because the fake ones, from what I've noticed, have no energy behind them, whereas the ones that are actually real, you can get a sense of the beings or the frequencies that are connected to that. And again, I mean, it's an evolving skill set, you know, it's something that's still a work in progress, but I think there is something to be said for reading the energy of particular things. Or even when somebody's telling me a story, so like, for example, like yourself, you know, we're having this interview, I feel the truth behind your words. But sometimes people say things, or I read something on the internet and I'm like, there's no energy, you know? And so it's having that frequency discernment to be able to go, hang on a second, yes, there is truth behind this, or no, that person's absolutely BSing and I'm not gonna that, you know?
Well, that's the thing in our research, I think too. I think we're very good at discerning the BS from the truth, you know, at least, and I know you are, I am too. Whereas, you know, I'm really good at, like, and if somebody's, you know, like I get a lot of calls, like messages, you know, please help us, our house is haunted, please help us. And I have to say that we don't do that. We don't do that because I never want to represent ourselves of something that we don't do, but I always refer them to someone that does do that. You know, that can cleanse the house and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I've talked to some people and you definitely could tell whether or not, you know, they're telling you a story or they're telling you the truth, because the people that I've interviewed and I've for this UFO video, you can see the genuine, like, trauma and the angst behind their words. And they're just as confused as you are. And they're confused about the situation as far as like what they saw, and they just want answers half the time, you know? And that's the thing. People have nothing to gain by that, you know, and they just want answers. And that's why I think because this is such a commonplace thing now, that's why I think people are more coming forward more freely now, which is great, because there's so many people out there that have got so many incredible stories. And I just interviewed Mark O'Connell, the guy that he wrote some scripts for Star Trek, but he had access and has access to the J. Allen Hynek files from Blue Book, from Project Blue Book. Some accounts and some accounts from witnesses and UFO reports that no one has seen or even heard of. So he's seeing all this stuff kind of like for the first time. And it's really cool. There's some really cool cases there that are, pretty unexplainable, but never made it to the public, mindset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow, that's incredible. It's such a big topic. I mean, we could go on about this, for a lot longer. I guess just to kind of wrap it up today, what would be your key message for someone out there who's curious and, wants to maybe discover more of this for themselves?
I would say, look at some of the cases from the past. Look at Roswell, but just don't stop there. Look at the Betty and Barney Hill case. Look at the Calvin Parker Pascagoula encounter. Look at the Allagash abductions in 1976. All of these stories that are just so compelling and that have just got so much evidence. And the Travis Walton case. Look at all of those cases where they're similar in their accounts of like what these creatures are doing. And here, the other thing is too, a lot of these accounts, no one is being harmed per se. There's experiments being done on them, but we haven't seen any malevolence from these things yet. It seems to be very peaceful. But I would say look at some of those old cases. And there's a lot of freedom of information stuff out there too that you could look and do some research on a lot of the cases that are happening now. Look into the Navy pilot UFO encounters, and just look at some of the things in their own towns. I'm sure every town's got some kind of a UFO report, especially MUFON, Mutual UFO Network. I think they have different chapters all over the country, pretty much all over the world. And that's another good way of getting involved and finding out on a local level in your community what is going on.
Beautiful. Amazing. That's great advice. And we will definitely put your links in the descriptions. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us today. I think it's been a very, very insightful discussion, and it's so beautiful just to keep opening that doorway into helping people realize that there is more out there. And also for the ones that already know, the people that don't need any more convincing, like myself and you, it's just about keeping that conversation going. So, we're not relying or waiting for some government entity to put some disclosure in, but really recognizing that we can do the work. This is not classified information. The UFOs are out there. If you want to connect, you can connect. And just keep doing the research and keep expanding our reality in that way. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to First Contact. I'm your host Eesha Patel, and I'm so excited to have this conversation about open contact with extraterrestrial beings. Come join me in the Facebook community where you can continue the discussion, or keep listening for another episode of First Contact.